health to wealth and everything in between. Welcome to the Weekend Collective on NewsTalk ZB.
NewsTalk ZB on a Saturday afternoon. Tim Roxburgh here, and Tim Beveridge is in for Tim Wilson. Thank you for your company, and we'll be to the phones in a moment on 0800 80 1080. Remember, you can text as well on 9292. This is the OneRoof radio show, so this is where we talk all things property, and our special guest is property commentator Ashley Church. Ashley, good afternoon.
G'day, Tim.
Nice to have you with us, and Tim and I are excited, it's fair to say, about the proposed Waterfront Stadium. And Beveridge, for people who've maybe just heard the headlines and haven't actually read the gist of what could happen, what's the basic plot?
Well, the plot is that it's time to bulldoze Eden Park and build a magnificent waterfront stadium. And the idea is that it's going to be zero cost to the ratepayers or the taxpayers, because these guys have got a proposal where there's a bit of a trade-off going on with the land around Eden Park. So we'll get rid of the land. We won't get rid of the land. We'll get rid of the building and trade off with the developers who will make money selling and developing real estate around Eden Park. Probably, I don't know how many thousand apartments you'd need to put there. Maybe more of a nuisance than the stadium. And that it's going to be a magnificent sunken stadium, which will be high enough to avoid tsunamis, apparently, and climate change, assuming that you go along with all that. And I just feel that it's different this time. Seems to be, it's a beautiful looking design. And I think that there's more of it. The PR battle has started with a slight head start. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think the difference this time is it's not being led by politicians. It's being led by business people and community leaders who are not only motivated to do it, but have actually got some ideas about how they might fund it, and have come up with a concept which I think's probably got pretty broad appeal. It's interesting. There are some stings in the tail. One of them being, as you indicated before, it's being sold as this idea that there's no cost. In fact, it's not no cost, because they've got to trade off Eden Park, and of course that's got some value, which is obviously owned by the ratepayers at the moment, or the Eden Park Trust Board, that would have to essentially be given over to fund part of the cost. But putting all of that aside, it's a great concept. It's imaginative. It's thought through a number of the issues that I think came up last time that probably killed it back prior to 2011 when they were talking about doing a similar concept. So good stuff.
Do you think that? Do you think the biggest battle in a way is the PR battle? Because when Tim and I were thinking about the show at the start, we're reminding ourselves of all the big developments that have happened.
Yeah.
And we forget, because we see these wonderful new stadiums, we forget that most people hated the idea. Forsyth Bar, the massive opposition to that. I think the Cape
Dunedin loves it. Dunedin loves that stadium now, and they hated it before it was built.
That's right. And in fact, there's a precedent here, albeit on a smaller scale, when they built what's now Spark Arena. So if you remember back when that was being built, it was talked about as being a white elephant. The people who were promoting it were saying that there was a sweet spot for concerts for people who couldn't fill Mount Smart or Western Springs, and if we brought them here, that they would be able to... And there was that was nonsense and rubbish by those who criticised it. It's never empty. It's always full.
Isn't that funny, actually? That's good to remember that people opposed Spark Arena.
Yep.
And we have the biggest acts in the world, and even if they could fill Mount Smart or Western Springs, they might have a show which is tailored for being indoors.
Of which they'll do 3 nights instead of 1.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's been sensational. Give us a call, 0800 80 1080. Is it time we bulldoze Eden Park and got a waterfront stadium? And we encourage you, no matter where you are in the country, hearing about how people change their points of view about, say, Dunedin Stadium. I think Wellington, there is a feeling that stadium could have been done better. Certainly having all yellow seats is not a great idea, because you can have 20,000 people in that 30,000 seat stadium, and it can look empty, because your eyes just drawn to the yellow.
It's confusing to bees.
Yeah, the bees are very confused.
And it is a nationwide issue, because it's a flagship stadium like this is not just going to belong to just Auckland. It's going to belong to everyone. And to be honest, if I was living south of the Bombay Hills and there was an All Black test on, the idea of going along to this particular stadium, if it turns out as we envisage, I think it's hugely exciting.
Hey, I do have one slight gripe, and that is that it's typical of Kiwis, is in that when we build things, we build to capacity, and no more. It's 60,000. It's not 90,000 or 100,000 or one of these larger stadium sizes. And I know the argument to that is that you're not going to fill 100,000 very often, but it does mean once again we're constrained by what does need to be a bigger facility from time to time.
Well, so long as they're not all yellow seats.
That's true.
So I think with this one that it would be most of the time 50,000 with the potential for it to go to 60 or 65. 0800 80 1080. Is it time we bulldozed Eden Park? Let's go to the phones. And producer Andy, was that a green light? Sorry, I just didn't hear what you said. I can't hear what he said. What did you say, Andy? He's gone. So, give us...
I think Shall we take a risk?
He's back. James is with us now. G'day.
Yeah, just to comment on the stadium, I think it's a great idea. The only thing I don't know, who's going to own the stadium at the end if there's this trade-off with land?
I suspect it would probably be a mix of private and public. So again, if we use that precedent of Spark Arena, that was partly funded by the council, partly funded by a private company. That's now mostly owned by Live Nation, and the ownership of that eventually vests back in the council, I think, after 60 years. I'd imagine this would be something similar. You'd have private and public, and the reason for that is if you're going to have, if it's going to be at no cost, then there's obviously got to be some commercial gain to some party who's actually going to build the thing. Where are you running from, by the way? Which part of the country are you in, James?
I'm in Auckland, so I live in Westmere. So, I mean, for me, I think it's a great idea. The fact that it's sunken, so your sight lines are protected, I think is great.
Yep.
I don't have an issue about the sea rising, but my issue was someone's done the numbers, clearly, and Eden Park, the land at Eden Park and how you can develop that makes the numbers work. So I was just interested in who owned it and who operates it, because there'll be an operating budget
Absolutely.
with these things as well, and ongoing maintenance.
Absolutely.
Forget about that.
Yeah. Thanks, James.
Appreciate the call. Okay. And our expert is property commentator Ashley Church, 0800 80 1080. Because this is twofold in many ways. As we say, it's about the whole country, because it would be a national stadium. I can hear, as I say that, people going, shut up. This would be an Auckland stadium.
But we have to remind ourselves that a lot of the sons and daughters and mothers and fathers of people, we're all connected around the country.
And has no one ever heard of Te Papa?
Yes.
Oh, well, I mean,
now, that's
bingo.
The point. Yeah, yep. Love Te Papa.
Yes.
In fact,
should be in Auckland, of course.
I want to love it more, but no, I am a fan, and I'm very happy for it to be in Wellington. Just as far as concerns about rising sea levels and also about tsunamis. So the way this is designed, reading here, and Simon Wilson from the Herald wrote a great piece about this. He says the steps which are around it are planned to rise 5 metres above the high tide mark, and the architects are saying that they've been reading here. They've been told by GNS Science that the building would be able to withstand a 3.5 metre tsunami. Now, the other thing that's really important to know is that as people are increasingly aware of tsunami damage around the world, that the Waitemata Harbour is not a tsunami risk.
Not really. I mean, it's funny that we're worried about whether the stadium is going to be tsunami-proof, and yet we're not asking the same question of Herne Bay, Kohimarama, Mission Bay, and how many thousands of people in Auckland live. Okay, all the people in the stadium survived the tsunami, but everyone else is floating about 10 miles out to sea.
Hey, I do have one question in relation to this, and this is this whole issue of the sort of the fortress, which is Mount Eden, and the fact that the All Blacks always win there and nobody can win. I mean, is there a hoodoo that we lose by building a new stadium? Do you kind of start with a fresh slate and have to start that whole sort of tradition again?
I think it's a really good thing to bring up, because we in the 1980s demolished a lot of buildings of great heritage value, and for some reason during that decade, people weren't really that fussed. A lot of people, or maybe just people in positions of influence, weren't that fussed about what buildings might be precious enough to hang on to. In the case of stadiums, around the world, stadiums with great history have actually been knocked down because they just aren't right anymore. Yeah,
perhaps actually,
Ellis Park, South Africa.
Just thinking about the momentum towards this and the idea of it being a fortress, perhaps we're only one All Black loss at Eden Park away from the whole country embracing the idea of the All Blacks of shifting venue.
What are you suggesting?
That we're fickle and we're superstitious and we need to get over it.
All right, join the conversation. 0800 80 1080. If you are vehemently opposed to the idea of a waterfront stadium, if you love Eden Park so much and you think that history is too strong to let go of. Or you may be somewhere else in the country and just going, you know what, I hate stadiums, we build them and people don't come. Whatever your stance is, 0800 80 1080. And we're wondering, is it time we bulldoze Eden Park and got a waterfront stadium? Focusing in on that history. I'm a cricket nut far more than a rugby one, Ashley, and I love that cricket history at Eden Park. But even I think that it's not like we've spent the money on Eden Park and we don't have to spend money on it again. Eden Park would need a massive multi-million-dollar overhaul every decade anyway.
In fact, when they developed it for the Rugby World Cup, there was talk about, I think, another 50 million within 15 or 20 years. So you're quite right. Incidentally, under this proposal, the intention isn't that cricket will be paid at this new stadium. It'll be paid at
Western Springs.
Yes, exactly. So you know, that's a change too.
Jim, welcome to the program.
Yeah, just on about the stadium. Hey, they tried to put that through quite a few years back, but my question is, how many is it going to seat? And you imagine trying to empty a stadium that's going to seat probably 100,000 or 50,000 people out of 2 exits.
Oh, I think that you look at any modern stadium. Sorry, I took that away from Ashley, but any modern stadium I've been to, one of the main things is that getting in and out of them is super easy, and I wouldn't imagine this would be any different, would it?
Yeah, but if it's on the waterfront, is not one side of it.
There's a loop all the way around.
And where'd you get the two exits from? I'm just interested to know. I must admit, I didn't drill down into the design.
I'm just trying to think. There's only going to be what road? Okay, what road does it?
I see what you're saying.
Country-wise, yeah. What roading is there, and where's the closest motorway, and where's the? I mean, it's right downtown. I mean,
I'm guessing that given its proximity to Britomart, there may well be an opportunity for trains. I don't know, a ferry. I mean, it's on the waterfront, so there may be other forms of egress apart from roads.
Yeah.
And all the motorways, Jim, are close to it because it's CBD.
Where are you, Jim? Which part of the country?
I'm down Hawke's Bay.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So McLean Park?
Would you make a trip up? Would it be enticing to you?
No, that's the biggest problem is that everything's in Auckland and half of Hawke's Bay. I think they're going all the way up there to go and see something that's just too far.
Do you?
We think Hawke's Bay is more central.
Do you ever go to travel to an All Black match then? Because I don't think there are too many in Napier or Hastings, are there?
I'm from Hawke's Bay. I know there was a game against Samoa in '95, I think, but there may have been a couple during the Rugby World Cup, and that's pretty much been it. So
memories.
Yeah, nothing. We get nothing down here, so.
Well,
I have a stadium down here.
You do. You've got McLean Park, but they had the major issues with the drainage, didn't they, Jim?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. But
let's not go there, Jim.
Hey, good on you, Jim.
I love that. Sorry, I just love that response. They had to stop international cricket at McLean Park. He's like, he made it sound like they were being soft.
We don't like to talk about it, Tim.
Actually, I've got a question. I got a question for Ashley actually, because during the course of the debate about Eden Park, I'm sure there are a lot of developers and people who know a lot about the value of land and the potential to develop it. What do you think the value is to any potential developer in getting the land at Eden Park? What's the potential for them?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'd hate to put a number on it and then be wrong, but I suspect it depends on what they propose to do with it. And I'd imagine you would end up there, because it's a fairly big tract of land, you would end up with a mixed accommodation, maybe even a little bit of commercial. You'd have some apartments, you'd have some freestanding housing. So depending on how that was configured, I mean, it wouldn't be the whole 1.8, but it could be a fairly substantial.
It's not going to be a quarter acre sections, but that's for one. On every quarter acre, there's going to be how many?
And if you think that in Kingsland that there are a lot of really good apartments being built, the best apartments that have been built in the last sort of 5 years or so, a lot of them have been built along that ridgeline, which joins up. I think it's Great North Road.
Yes.
And previously, this was all car yards, and I was just
what's the potential for them?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'd hate to put a number on it and then be wrong, but I suspect it depends on what they propose to do with it. And I'd imagine you would end up there, because it's a fairly big tract of land, you would end up with a mixed accommodation, maybe even a little bit of commercial. You'd have some apartments, you'd have some freestanding housing. So depending on how that was configured, I mean, it wouldn't be the whole 1.8, but it could be a fairly substantial.
It's not going to be a quarter acre sections, but that's for one. On every quarter acre, there's going to be how many?
And if you think that in Kingsland that there are a lot of really good apartments being built, the best apartments that have been built in the last sort of 5 years or so, a lot of them have been built along that ridgeline, which joins up. I think it's Great North Road.
Yes.
And previously, this was all car yards, and I was just always so mystified that we gave car yards stunning views. Because you're on this ridgeline, you can see out to the Waitakaris on one side, you see out the rest of the city on the other. It's phenomenal real estate. We gave it to car yards.
That was the argument with the unitary plan too, in fairness. I mean, one of the things where they talk about the sort of up and out.
What's the potential for them?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'd hate to put a number on it and then be wrong, but I suspect it depends on what they propose to do with it. And I'd imagine you would end up there, because it's a fairly big tract of land, you would end up with a mixed accommodation, maybe even a little bit of commercial. You'd have some apartments, you'd have some freestanding housing. So depending on how that was configured, I mean, it wouldn't be the whole 1.8, but it could be a fairly substantial.
It's not going to be a quarter acre sections, but that's for one. On every quarter acre, there's going to be how many?
And if you think that in Kingsland that there are a lot of really good apartments being built, the best apartments that have been built in the last sort of 5 years or so, a lot of them have been built along that ridgeline, which joins up. I think it's Great North Road.
Yes.
And previously, this was all car yards, and I was just always so mystified that we gave car yards stunning views. Because you're on this ridgeline, you can see out to the Waitakaris on one side, you see out the rest of the city on the other. It's phenomenal real estate, we gave it to car yards.
That was the argument with the unitary plan too, in fairness. I mean, one of the things where they talk about the sort of up and out philosophy, which is about building apartments, was this idea, exactly as you say, that we were wasting land for purposes that actually didn't maximise its value. So,
Yeah, because car yards, as much as it's fun, I guess, for the people who work there to have a nice view, it's better if there were more people living there as opposed to it being Toyotas.
What have you got against car yards?
Right, look, I love a good car yard. It just doesn't need to have phenomenal real estate underneath it.
Actually, I was just wondering, you think of the events they tried to get off, that we know about the history of the recent event they tried to get off the ground at Eden Park, and how much the neighbours had to say about that.
Yes.
I wonder how much say the neighbours would get on if Eden Park was going to be demolished and it was actually going to be turned into residential. Oh God, what would the process be? It just makes my head spin.
Yeah.
Helen Clark, I'm not opposed. She might make her feelings felt and manage to poop all over the plans.
I think the thing there is that even if you're in favour with Helen Clark with that story, even if you're in favour of, say, concerts at Eden Park and more events at Eden Park, I think she did make a really good point that the event was being organised as sort of a Trojan horse for that. Now you might support the goal, which is to have more concerts there, but to make it out that this is a charitable thing for a piece of health equipment, seemed to me to be a little bit insincere. 0800 80 1080 if you'd like to be on the program. Our property commentator and our expert this afternoon, Ashley Church, who's been on the Weekend Collective a couple of times before, and you can have your say. So we're talking as...
I don't know why it's quiet.
Neither did I.
It's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
They park.
Okay.
Ever seen us play?
As far as you being a non-Aucklander, how do you feel about a new stadium in a city that's not your own?
Well, they put graveyards up at Mount Smart, wasn't it?
This has been a real hoot, Dave. I don't know. I appreciate you ringing.
Just before we move on to the thing, the biggest battle for this is going to be, I love Simon Wilson's point about it's going to be people with imagination, i.e. the people who come up with the plans for the stadium, are trying to convince people who have no imagination, who work at the council. And it was a great analogy. He says there's this vault down somewhere with the jangling of keys and everything where all the great ideas go to die. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think to be fair too, I mean, often we chastise councils for not being imaginative enough, but to be fair, it's probably actually not their job. It is the job of groups like this to actually come out and promote these things, and hopefully if it's compelling enough, because you do actually want a bit of attention. You don't just want to be putting everything up that people propose. So you actually want good ideas to actually be put forward in a way that's going to be convincing.
Ashley, being that you know property, as far as revitalising the CBD, which has been a process which has been happening since we won the America's Cup.
Yep.
Do you think that New Zealanders have underestimated just how important it is for any of our cities that the CBD is humming and what effect that has on the wider economy?
I think some New Zealanders and some Aucklanders have perhaps underestimated. I mean, Auckland is, whether we like it or not, Auckland is New Zealand's sole international city, and it's actually one of the great international cities of the world. And in order to be an international city, it has to do things that international cities do. It's got to have the sorts of facilities that people who come here expect. It's got to have the sort of lifestyle that's going to actually denote that distinction as an international city. This is another one of a number of things that we've been slowly doing over the last couple of decades to bring ourselves into that space and make sure that we're actually presenting ourselves in a way which is going to be what people expect.
Yeah, and I think it's the fun of that. It's that you go, okay, it's Sunday afternoon and the sun's out, or today, Saturday afternoon, and that you think, okay, we'll bring the family in.
Yep.
There are parks now that you can walk around. There are good playgrounds for the kids to play in. If the stadium gets the go-ahead, this is a far more exciting design than 10 years ago, partially sunken in with that walking track around, and there'll be more trees and everything. It'll be amazing.
I mean, we can be enormously proud of this place, and it's not just facilities of this kind too. It's things like finally completing the Waterview Tunnel. It's completing the motorway circuit around the city. It's all of these things that we've done that have actually finally brought it up to the standard that it needs to be at.
All right, 0800 80 1080. You can still ring through on that one. Is it time we bulldozed Eden Park and got a waterfront stadium? Alongside talk on that one, there's something else we want to move to.
Well, of course, the question is, where's the money going to come from in terms of whatever? I know it's a zero-sum game, but foreign investments. And, of course, we've got this foreign buyers ban, which is about to kick in. And maybe we're seeing, I saw a headline today in the Herald, that we're seeing a bit of flattening in some places in Auckland selling for under their valuation, in fact quite a lot under the valuation. Has that started to kick in? Is this foreign buyers ban going to make a difference?
Not a jot.
I can see you
not
drew a
a jot.
very large breath there ready for that, deliver that punchline.
This is complete nonsense. This is ideological nonsense. So just to give you a little bit of history on this, we have had some foreign buyers in the New Zealand market during the peak of the boom. Most of those people would have been isolated to Queenstown and the eastern and central suburbs of Auckland. The rest of the country wouldn't have been affected by them at all. Just to put some numbers around that, the Stats Department actually started counting them about a year and a half ago, and the indication is that they represented about 3 to 4% of the market. This is ideological nonsense. It will make not one jot of difference to the market.
Can I just
Bevan.
ask one question in connection with that, though? Because as we see with the share market, and often when major crashes and things happen, a lot of the time it's driven by sentiment. Sentiment's not necessarily something that makes sense, but people get the idea. Is there a danger that that people see the exiting from the market of foreign buyers might affect their sentiment, so that might actually have an effect? Or
maybe in other parts of the world. New Zealand's actually pretty consistent. The property market here, you've got to go back to the mid-70s to find the last time we had any crash of any real substance. The market's very, very consistent in that it goes up, flattens, and it's done that for about 40-odd years. So there's nothing at the moment that would indicate to me that there's going to be any major impact on the market.
All right, you can ring through on that one as well. So the foreign buyers ban is about to come in. This doesn't affect Australians, it doesn't affect Singaporeans either, and it doesn't apply to apartments. So we're wondering, will we regret a foreign buyers ban? And if you've heard anything that Ashley said and maybe you've got a different take, you're welcome to ring through 0800 80 1080, or the exact same take or a moderately similar take. I mean, there's so many different variations of your takes. Also, taking calls about a waterfront stadium and bulldozing Eden Park. Michael, what do you reckon?
Yeah, look, the first point you have to make is that we have to do something. We don't have an option with Eden Park. It is in the wrong place and it just doesn't work. As soon as you get any number of people around that venue, it doesn't have the infrastructure to support it. It's too hard to get to. There's just any number of reasons why it is never going to meet our needs going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, for 50 or 60 or 70 odd years, it's probably been in a place which has been suitable because, now we've got increasing demand on that part of the city. We've got a growing population. We've got more traffic. So I think you're probably right. The sorts of issues that are facing it now are only really over the last 10 or 20 years. So for that reason alone, we probably have to look pretty hard to find somewhere else that's going to be more in keeping with a facility that's going to have lots of traffic and is going to serve the city in a much greater way.
If you moved outside Auckland and you said to the people in Otago, would you rather go back to Carisbrook or in Wellington to Athletic Park? Of course they wouldn't. And the old stories, and I hear Williams and those coming up saying, it's got, we can't leave Eden Park. Of course you can. It's a piece of grass, boys. Get over it.
Yep.
Actually, it's a good reminder too about Carisbrook and Athletic Park, because Athletic Park, those stands, the gradient, I actually get a slightly kind of freaked out feeling when I look at photos of Athletic Park, because
Edmund Hillary trained on them, I think.
some of those famous games. I mean, the people in the Mallard stand, you see the cameras would pan up and you'd see these people just almost at hypothermic levels.
All right, let's carry on. 0800 80 1080. Tony, what do you reckon?
Well, speaking as an Australian that's lived here for 40 years, there's been a lot of talk about comparing the stadium to the Opera House. So the Opera House in Sydney was funded by a lottery. Why not do the same thing?
I guess that's an option. I think probably with this regard to this particular option, there's a group who's come forward and said, hey, we've got a solution, here's how we propose to fund it. But you're right, there are imaginative ways in which you can do that. What that does presuppose, though, is prior to this proposal is that there was actually an appetite to do this. I think what these guys have done is they've come out of nowhere and said, we think this should happen, this is what it should look like, and here's how we should fund it. So, arguments about funding. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, they haven't come out of nowhere. This has been discussed since 2006.
Well, it was 2011, or just prior to 2011, Trevor Mallard actually put forward a pretty serious proposal at the time for the Rugby World Cup, and that was dismissed by the then council for a whole range of reasons. And as far as I'm aware, there's been a couple of sort of incursions to try and have another crack at it since then, but this is the first serious one since that time. So
But funding has always been a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And the talk in the past has been that the council or the government would have to put their hand in their pocket, and I think that's the beauty of this proposal, is they're proposing to do it in a different way.
Tony, you mentioned that you're an Aussie and that Eden Park, both for cricket and for rugby, has been really good for New Zealand. What do you think? What would you say to people who are emotionally attached to Eden Park?
Oh, look, don't get me wrong. I'm an Aussie, but I've lived in Queenstown for 42 years.
Right.
So, we, a couple of, 5, 6, 7 years ago, got foisted with the Foresight Bar Stadium. And initially, you just went, no, this doesn't make sense. But look at the success.
I know. Well, you had Ed Sheeran, you had Pink playing there. You had Fleetwood Mac playing there before they fired Lindsay.
Build it and they will come, as they say. Interesting fun fact about the Opera House, what he's talking about. It took 14 years to build.
Yeah.
He's hoping it doesn't take us that long to make a decision.
Well, not only that, but the Danish architect vowed he'd never set foot in Australia ever again because the opposition to the Opera House was so vehement, and people thought this was such an eyesore and such a disgrace, and how could they destroy the precious waterfront with something that very soon after it was created became one of the most famous buildings in the world.
Incidentally, I think there's probably a more pertinent example, and that's in Melbourne with the Etihad Stadium, which is actually down on the waterfront. That's where Aussie Rules is played in Melbourne, and it's a great stadium. And I mean, I don't know the history to that, Tony. You might, but I suspect there was probably a bit of controversy when that was built as well.
Yeah. All right. Tony's departed, but we have Phil. G'day, Phil.
How are you? Oh, just to correct you, Athletic Park 1957 was the opening of the Millard, not the Mallard.
Oh, yes. I know.
If Mallard had anything to do with it, it would never have been built.
Anyway. Good point.
Good point. Trevor was trying to build a stadium.
He was.
In fairness.
Oh, yeah, I know. But in Auckland, that is Wellington, that Auckland on the waterfront is the only place for a stadium.
Yeah.
Good man.
I'll tell you that now.
Good man.
But I'll tell you one other thing. Eden Park is not just a piece of grass. You guys plucked $426 million from hard-working New Zealand taxpayers not too many years ago to revamp Eden Park.
Us personally?
Not sure about the you guys, but yeah.
And there would have been some like only slightly hardworking taxpayers' money.
That's
in that
right.
one too.
Yeah, so you're going to pay it back before you get on with the new stadium?
Is that the time?
Anyway, that's off my chest. Okay,
All right.
guys.
Yeah.
Good on you, Wellington. I mean, Phil. It said Wellington on the... Sorry, I've had a busy week. Good on you, Wellington. It said it was in Wellington.
Freudian slip.
Good on you, Wellington. Or as his friends call him, Phil. Okay. We'll take a short break. 0800 80 1080 9292. Give us a text. So, should Eden Park be bulldozed, make way for a waterfront stadium, no matter where you live in the country? We want your thoughts on this, and you may be basing your thoughts based on stadiums built or not built in your own neck of the woods. So, give us a call. 0800 80 1080. We're also talking the foreign buyers ban, which is coming in. Will we regret that? Ashley Church, who's our property expert, he's with us now. He says this was all ideologically driven and is a mistake. Beveridge is having a coughing fit. So we'll go to a break and return right after this. 23 to 5. NewsTalk ZB Weekend Collective, Tim Roxburgh, Tim Beveridge with you on a Saturday afternoon at 20 minutes to 5. Lady Gaga, who I hope wins a Best Actress Oscar. She's incredible in A Star Is Born. Bradley Cooper needs to win Best Actor. The movie needs to win Best Film, Best Director. Just give them all the Oscars now already. Sorry, First Man. Neither here nor there, actually. You can text on 9292. What do you got, Beveridge?
Yeah, we've got a couple of interesting texts. Somebody likes the idea of having a stadium where they can actually open the floodgates and flood it for some water sports. Probably a little ambitious if we can't remove the turf.
Yep.
And another guy somebody else had a response to the person from Wellington. One text is just saying Auckland, blah, blah, blah. But this person says, hi, guys. With that guy from Wellington... we've already given it back, re to Papa funding, etc. Ha ha, cheers.
All right.
So there we go, just a bit of tit for tatting there.
Thank you for texting through on 9292. Ashley Church is our property commentator in the studio. 0800 80 1080 if you'd like to be on. Bob, should Eden Park be bulldozed? What do you reckon?
No, keep it for something, and I reckon another stadium can be done somewhere along the foreshore. It was on TV the other night. You don't have to do this ultra expensive thing down near the wharves.
because you get another earthquake, you'd be in real trouble, wouldn't you? It would probably sink. Anyway, but I was more worried about the housing market and pointing out Ashley, of course, is representing, commercial interests, like New Zealand speculators and even real estate agents, effectively. But the problem is Australia and New Zealand...
Feel free to answer this, Ashley.
I'm interested to hear.
If we can play Bob backwards, he's actually saying that you're a devil.
I've just got to get a few facts in first. China's pretty much been colonising Australia and New Zealand. In Australia, the housing market has already been completely buggered in Sydney and Melbourne by them. The prices are ridiculous. There's far more. Officially, 20% of inner Auckland is being sold to Chinese officially, but the 3 to 4%.
That's not entirely true, Bob.
Okay, let's take a deep breath, Bob, for a second. I think Ashley's got to get a couple of words in here.
All the trusts.
Bob, that's not entirely true. The figure that you're talking about, that 20%, was the last quarter, and the reason for that, it's a bit like when governments put excise taxes on alcohol or cigarettes, is that people rush in and buy them just before those taxes come, and that's basically what happened last time. There was a big increase in those areas because people recognised the ban was coming in, but the consistent figure's about 3 or 4%. But look, take your point. Hey, the other thing I would pick up on, though, that you talked about the cost of building the stadium. The reason for that, as I understand it, is because they're actually proposing to put it at 28 metres underground. If they built it above ground, they could build it at about the third the cost, but you've got all sorts of issues around view lines and people's views being impeded as a result of this massive, great structure. So it's a question of what's more important to you. Do you want to have a view, or do you want to have something that's going to cost you a little bit less to build in the short term?
Okay, can I say something?
Of course.
Okay. Now, even David Parker was saying that there's a pretty consistent large ownership of inner Auckland, but the point is it's disguised because they're not declaring that they take out trusts held in New Zealand names, so they don't show up under the foreign stats. There was a Chinese student in Auckland who's bought something like 30 or 40 houses. He's doing it on behalf of investors in China. So currently there's a lot of Chinese money has come in that's not been declared. There's New Zealand
it's a foreign buyers ban, not an anti-Chinese ban. So it's a ban designed to actually stop people of ethnicities other than Singaporeans and Australians. So it's just important to understand that, because then it very quickly becomes xenophobic, and that's something that I think none of us would actually think was a good thing.
Thanks for the call, Bob. And you're welcome to ring through, follow on from Bob on either of those topics. The foreign buyers ban is about to come in, 0800 80 1080. Will we regret that? And also as to whether Eden Park should be bulldozed so that that property can be sold off and highly desirable near central city suburb, and makes more sense having that as a highly residential area, which reduces the number of events that can happen at Eden Park. It makes more sense, in my mind, that becomes residential, as much as I've loved Eden Park over the years. And that Waterfront Stadium, actually, as you said, being partially submerged.
28 metres.
I love that we would live in a country which would have something that would be internationally significant, a partially submerged stadium, as opposed to here's the slightly cheap one that we've come up with because we didn't have much money.
Which looks a little bit like what's at North Harbour or something. I've got a text here which is, it's on the house, on the undervaluation thing. On the subject of the houses in Auckland selling undervaluation, it just goes to show that the Auckland Council has grossly overvalued our homes for the sole purpose of taking more from the ratepayers. Classic Labor government move, Mr. Goff. Regards, Graham. I think that's an easy response. So long as they've overvalued us all, we're okay.
Yeah, Tim, and the other thing too, without getting into a big long debate around it, but a CV is simply something that a council does to set rates. It's not necessarily the basis upon which you should be determining what your house is worth. So this obsession that some folks have with using the CV as some sort of indicator of what their house is worth is part of the problem, because it's actually just not accurate.
0800 80 1080. Richard, hi.
Hi, just regarding the Eden Park, I suppose one of the other way of dealing with it is just leave Eden Park as it is and sort of buy out the people surrounding the Eden Park who doesn't want the noise and invite them out, and then the government or the council can sell it later to people who would be happy to live in an area where there's going to be music, sports, and everyone will be happy.
That's actually a reasonable suggestion. I think the issue with this one is that the parties or the group that have actually put this proposal together, one of the requirements is that they would need to be able to take possession of Eden Park and to develop that for residential and commercial purposes in order to make this other option work. So understand where you're coming from, but I don't think that's on the table with respect to this particular option.
But it's a decent point, and Richard, thank you for the call. It's a decent point that even though I think Eden Park should go, that don't move into a neighbourhood that's got something huge that you don't like.
Yep. An airport.
It's and there are going to be good things and bad things about any neighbourhood. But if there's this massive thing, there was a chicken poultry factory near my school, and the smell was just horrific. But if you had a really sensitive nose, then don't live across the road from it.
Actually, thinking of the neighbours and how they went too keen on on a concert happening, you probably have to spare a thought for them if this plan goes ahead, because can you imagine how many years of construction noise they're going to have to put up with?
Absolutely.
Actually, it's serious. It would be years and years of construction noise. It could be quite horrendous, but that's going to form the basis of some objections, probably.
I'd like to think they'd actually be pretty happy with it, because it's a combination of what they've been wanting for the last 20 or 30 years, but I suspect you're right, there'd still be some issues.
And then as soon as you go to that first game at the new partially sunken stadium with the awesome parklands around it and that concourse around the edge, and you've got the city skyline in the background, you'll be going, I can't believe I ever opposed this. What do you reckon, Liz?
Yeah, hi. I think the stadium will be fabulous, quite frankly. And it wasn't that I was ringing you about. I was ringing you about the foreign buyers.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I have nothing against, a certain type, certain ethnicity buying, but all
Australians.
Look, what has happened by bringing in huge numbers of immigrants or, people that are coming from other countries, it's pushed our housing prices up so much that it's impacting our own people, and, they, now can't get a home, and that leads on to a whole lot of other issues. And the fact was, everybody kept on saying, it's only 3%. Now, if you were coming in as an economic immigrant and you only had to have 1.5 million, and which a lot of them were doing, they would never have appeared on a foreign buyers list. So all I'm saying is there's been some fudging of the figures, and if you have too much of your property stock owned by one type of...
Can I jump in on you there? See, here's the thing. I mean, we're a nation of immigrants. We're a nation that's actually been formed by immigration over the last 150, and in fact, if you want to go back 1,200 years of people who've come to this country from other parts of the world. And the issue I've got, and I understand your point, but here's the issue I've got with it. When you go to the auction rooms and there's South Africans or Poms or Australians or other ethnicities that don't necessarily look different to us, do we have the same issue? And I would argue with that we don't. So what we're doing is we're actually identifying people on the basis of the fact that they ethnically look different to us. And in many cases, those people are actually New Zealanders. In fact, if you listen to them talk, a lot of them talk with Kiwi accents. So I think we need to be very careful about identifying groups simply on their ethnicity and saying we don't want you, but you folks from South Africa, you folks from the UK, you folks from other parts of the world, you're okay. Well, that's the problem with this debate.
And of course, the foreign buyers ban will have little impact if our immigration rates continue. So they're two separate issues, aren't they? Yeah.
Thanks for the call, Liz. 0800 80 10 80. The Weekend Collective this afternoon with Tim Beveridge and for Tim Wilson, Ashley Church, our property commentator, and Chris, you're our last caller. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and good to hear your voice again, Tim. It's great seeing people come back and... Oh, sorry, I've been at a concert with you in a band.
We'll both take that one, Tim.
It clearly wasn't me.
but also great to hear Ashley. And so that nice to have you on the program, Chris. Now, on the stadium, do you reckon Eden Park should go?
Well, actually, yes, I do. Just as far as location and students to the residents there, yes, I think the idea of having a stadium that's from what they're suggesting, sounds rather neat, actually. But I just wanted to actually clear up a little comment that was made before on rates. Now, I used to work for a district council, not Auckland, but another district council in the finance division. Rates are not set by the level of your property. Okay, the rate is set by the council turning around and calculating how much money it needs to run. The other thing I think needs to be cleared up there is that the property values are not set by council either. They're actually set by the Valuer General, who's a central government organisation based out of Wellington.
They're actually not. They're set by independent parties that are contracted by the council's QV and a couple of other parties that do them on their behalf. It's not done by the Valuer General, but I take your point.
Chris, sorry, that's all we've got time
Yeah,
for.
look, actually, I think I'm not sure we could call this an official poll, but I think that we're sensing from people pretty much a vast majority, if not 100% of our callers, in favour of the new stadium.
Absolutely,
Isn't that
that's great
Maybe,
news. That's fantastic.
because I think traditionally when we've discussed stadiums, there's always been a lot of poo-pooing, but not too much poo-pooing.
Not today.
Less poo today.
Less poo. We had some other things like flatulence in the previous hour, but we've got over that.
Which is not to say that stadiums around the world haven't always been bad ideas, and you can learn from the mistakes made in places like Sydney where they built it way too far away. This would be central, and that's so much better. Ashley, always a pleasure having you on the program.
Very welcome.
Ashley Church, political commentator, property expert, property commentator. I'm sure you've got political thoughts as well.
I do,
So
not today.
Not today.
No, thank goodness.
Back in just a moment.
Given the last week.
8 minutes to 5, News Talk ZB.